Hello everyone, this is Matt. In the last video we talked about validity and soundness. In this video we're going to talk about strength. Deductive arguments have their own standard for what makes a good inferential claim. Inductive arguments also have their own standard for what makes a good inferential claim. In this case it's going to be strength. So a strong argument must first be an inductive argument. Strong arguments are inductive arguments, and they are strong if this conditional holds to be true. So remember in the last video, we talked about the conditional, and I told you that I highlighted, I bolded, I underlined, I italicized the if, because the if is really important. Same thing is going to be true in validity, same thing is going to be true in strength. To be a strong argument, it's got to first be inductive, and we've got this conditional. If the premises are true, then it is improbable that the conclusion is false. So if you remember the definition of validity in the last video, you'll notice it's very similar. The only difference is that one word, improbable, because validity said it's if the premises are true, then it's impossible for the conclusion to be false. Strong says if the premises are true, then it's improbable that the conclusion is false. Now this one word difference is very important because it reflects the difference between inductive and deductive arguments. Deductive arguments are supposed to give logically conclusive support for the conclusion, and what we mean by logically conclusive is reflected in the definition of validity. If the premises are true, it's impossible for the conclusion to be false. Inductive arguments, on the other hand, only give probabilistic support for conclusions. And what we mean by probabilistic support is given in this conditional claim. If the premises are true, then it's improbable that the conclusion is false. A weak argument is the opposite. If the premises are true, then it's not improbable that the conclusion is false. Now there's also a similarity between inductive and deductive arguments, what makes a good one. So remember from validity and the validity video, we had a term called sound. And a sound argument was a deductive argument that was valid and had true premises. For our purposes, we're going to call a cogent argument a strong inductive argument that has true premises. So it's very similar. Okay, so when it comes to being an argument in first place, you've got to have an inferential claim and you got to have evidential claims. When it comes to inductive arguments, to have a good inferential claim, that argument must be strong, and here's our definition of strength. And to have good evidential claims, they have to be true. So what we're saying when we're saying that in order to be cogent, we're saying that the evidential claim and the inferential claim must both be good. True evidential claims, which means true premises, and a strong inferential claim, which in this case, a good inferential claim, which in the case of inductive arguments, we're going to say is strong. All right, let's look at some examples. In this first example, we've got, no offense to all the rednecks out there, I'm from Alabama, so I'm allowed to make this joke. All right, so our evidence, we've got two people. This is an argument from analogy. In the first premise, we find out that Billy Bob's a redneck. He likes to fish. He drives a pickup truck with a gun rack in the back window, and he has only 3 teeth, and he's from Alabama. Daisy Mae is also a redneck. She likes to fish. She drives a pickup truck with a gun rack in the back window, and she only has 3 teeth. And so in an argument from analogy, we compare the two premises to see if we can infer the missing piece of information about the second person. And so that's what we conclude here, that she's probably from Alabama too. Now this is not a strong argument. It might be obvious that it's not strong, but it's important to think about why it's not strong. The evidence that we're given is not strong because it doesn't give us enough evidence to conclude that she's probably from Alabama too. And the main reason, because there's rednecks in just about all of the states in the United States. Again, no offense to rednecks. All right, here's another example. Every swan I've ever seen has been white, therefore the next swan I see will probably be white. Is this a strong argument? In this case, this one is a strong argument. If every swan you've ever seen has been white, and you've seen maybe we should add, and you've seen a lot of swans, then the likelihood that the next one you see will be white seems like it's going to be high. So this one actually the premise gives probabilistic support for the conclusion. Here's another example of a weak argument. So we've got a couple of premises. Again, this is another argument from analogy where we're comparing two restaurants. They have a lot in common. They are both in LA. They both get high ratings. They're both featured on the Food Network. And we're supposed to conclude that because Baru has gourmet food and Glorious Cafe has all of these commonalities with Baru, that Glorious Cafe is probably also going to be serving gourmet food too. Well, this one is not a strong argument because these pieces of evidence that we have aren't enough to give probabilistic support for the conclusion. And the reason is, just because a restaurant is in LA, gets good ratings, and is featured on the Food Network doesn't mean it has gourmet food. Because there's lots of different kinds of shows on Food Network that feature non-gourmet food, like diners, drive-ins, and dives. And you can be in LA, get high ratings, and be on the Food Network and not serve gourmet food. In fact, there's probably more restaurants that meet all these qualifications that don't serve gourmet food than do. So this is not a strong argument. All right, now we're going to talk about the actual truth and falsity of premises again. So I spent a lot of time in the last video talking about this, and I'm going to say it again. When it comes to inferential claims, whether a deductive argument is valid or an inductive argument is strong, it does not matter whether the premises are true or false. All that matters is if they were true, then they support the conclusion. Probabilistically in the case of inductive arguments, and necessarily in the case of deductive arguments. So the actual truth and falsity of the premises is irrelevant when we're talking about just the inferential claim. Here's another example. All of the past US presidents have been male. Therefore, Fresno State will probably not win. Well, this is an old example, but let's imagine they were playing football this year. If you don't know anything about football, then Fresno State's probably not going to win their conference in football. Well, the premise is true, but the conclusion doesn't follow from the premises, from the premise. So this is an example of an argument that's not a good argument. The inferential claim, we've got an irrelevant reason, so this is not a strong argument. Even though the premise is true, and the conclusion is probably also true, doesn't make it a good argument because our inferential claim fails. The premise is irrelevant when it comes to the conclusion. All right, one key difference when it comes to inductive and deductive arguments is that inductive arguments, the strength comes in degrees, and deductive argument, validity does not come in degrees. Validity is all or nothing. The argument is either valid or not, and there's no in between. Inductive arguments, the strength varies, and you can have some arguments that are more strong than others. Sometimes it's hard to tell where to draw the line between a strong and a weak argument, but you can have some arguments that are stronger than others because strength comes in degrees. Since we're talking about probability, you might have an argument where the premise gives you 99% support for the conclusion. So that's really strong. You might have another argument that gives you 75% support for the conclusion. That's still pretty strong. But the one that gives 99% support is way stronger. It's almost 100%, but it's not quite there. So we've got everything in between 99% and 75%. There's lots of gradations between strength, between the degree of strength of an inductive argument. Let's look at an example of this. So when we select 5 people at random, if we were to follow all the rules of statistics, then we might have some evidence that most of the class are probably Democrats. Not enough, so this is a weak argument. But when we bump it up to 20 people in the class, then this is much stronger than the previous argument. And so you can see how this comes in degrees, and we can say, well, 21 people are randomly selected, or 17 people. And as we vary our sample size, we see that some of these are stronger than others. All right, so that's it for strength. In the next video, we are going to go over a method for proving that arguments are invalid.